steal my chair. No, this is not just on my chair. I know I switched to you because you're just taller. I was like,
Yeah, it just takes it a minute to.
when the music stops, guys.
Thank you.
No thanks.
No?
No.
Okay. I'll have it.
That's all right, yeah.
Okay, I think we finally settled in somewhat. Maybe not. I think we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Fitzwater, Graham,
Present.
Hensley, Hussey, Kimna,
Here.
Mahalovich,
Here.
Prather,
Here.
Schreiber, Ward, Wiseman.
Okay. Okay, we're going to have our continuation of budget hearings. Tonight we have Public Works. Right? Yep. Public Works, Police, ready? Airport, wastewater, transit, and parking.
I have them all put together.
Okay. I think we're ready to proceed.
Got a quick PowerPoint up here, just talking points anyway. And I think in the budget book, it says the page number is 225, but I think it was 226 if you're trying to move around, find central maintenance. Can you turn your microphone? Got it. But anyway, just a quick overview on this first one here. Public Works, 130 employees in Public Works, and we have 10 budgets, and I outlined all 10 there. So it's kind of diverse as the department goes. A lot of different things going on. I did a quick total in there, just in rough numbers, around $26 million if you include all our capital and wastewater funds administered by Public Works. So a pretty good chunk of money. And some of our overreaching goes for all the divisions of Public Works, our employee engagement, and that we do that to promote our customer service outcomes, good customer service outcomes. Because right at the heart of Public Works, basically, we're a customer service organization. We provide services to the public, and so that's just a quick overview. So those, click on through here and. Unless there's any questions to start off with, but central maintenance is the first one in the budget book, so I'll just go through those. Is that fine for everyone?
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
Let's see. Okay, so I arranged all these similarly, just a broad overview of each group, and then the following one will be just a couple of performance measures for each division. But so the total budget, central maintenance, they maintain all the city's equipment, and as you can imagine, they have a big vehicle parts budget. And so what if you're anything in the general fund, that parts budget that's where your parts get charged to, and that's inside of their budget. And total budget, I did a kind of quick calculation there. We're in 2019, so I didn't use that budget, but we had an actual for 2018. So just to equate the two, what 2020 is versus 2 years ago, 2018, about 2.4% difference in those budgets. And I think as the city administrator or Margie, one of the two, said, there was like a 7% cut throughout these budgets in the general fund. So I just kind of tried to give everybody an idea of what that affected. And really in this budget, and you got mechanics and parts is the biggest share of the money. And so we had a parts growth in there, so we projected, originally in the budget 650, and so we cut that 7% there. And that's kind of a guessing game anyway. You don't really know what breaks down and that kind of thing, but it still has growth in it, just not as much at this point. And so obviously one of our goals for central maintenance this next year is maintaining aging fleet at a high level. And older equipment, you have more maintenance, and whether you're driving a fire truck out to the fire or a backhoe out to the we have events like the tornado, they happen, snow plows, whatever, we try to maintain those at a high level so they're always prepared and ready to go. Get the right button here we go. Whoops, wrong way.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the last slide? I just had a question I was
Whoops.
asking.
Am I doing this or are you doing this? Okay.
So, under this, the central maintenance,
Yes, sir.
this includes all of the city vehicles
Correct.
with the exceptions of parks, correct? So, as we see a growth, in which vehicles are we seeing, I guess, as relates to that's needing more work? Is it a certain fleet, or is it just general?
I think it's general. In my estimation, it's hard to identify. Some older trucks might be running better than even a newer truck, but it's just the whole fleet is aging just based on capital replacement. You can see if you looked at the pink sheet, there was a bunch of stuff in there, say for streets, for example, police cars, all kinds of vehicles in here, whether it's a car or equipment. And so, as that ages, more things are going to go wrong with it. When it's newer, you're probably doing brake jobs and oil changes, things that are quick and easy. And as it ages, maybe a little more maintenance intensive. Certainly in transit, I know some of the buses, there's transmissions and things that we have to work on, so it takes more money.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on that one? I got the little couple. Oh, thanks, mate. It's going to be easier to hit the buttons. Yeah, I'm challenged with that mouse. I don't know. Just a couple performance things I jotted down, and these are all in the budget. Of course, there's more, but outcome is one of the main things of central maintenance. Have good service because they're an internal group, but they service fire, police, all of city hall vehicles, all those kind of things. Public works, whether it's parking vehicles or weed eaters or lawnmowers or heavy equipment. One challenge that just came up today, we had the resignation of our heavy equipment mechanic. He's a diesel mechanic. And so obviously I have to get him replaced. But, we've had a lot of long-term people there in central maintenance. And sorry to see him go, although, good for him. He got a better job at Lynn Tech. And I think he's going to be doing some teaching down there. So great for Wes. And we like to look at, just some indicators back to what I was talking about, older equipment, especially if you look at some of those combined fleet operating costs per mile. Well, one of the reasons is it's just a indicator that we can look at and say, okay, these costs are creeping up, or are they going the other way? And a lot of that's probably based just on the age of the equipment, really, when it gets right down to it. And then the actual cost of fleet repair, and that's a little bit different, where every piece of equipment that comes in gets a work order, and so we assign shop hours to that. And so if you're a fund like wastewater or parking or something, that comes out of your budget and goes into as a revenue into the general fund. But if you're a fire truck, for example, that's general fund item, but we still assigned a work order cost to it just to track it. So we like to track those costs and look at those and see where we're coming out at. If those costs keep escalating, a lot of times, why is that, or is it a particular piece of equipment or something like that?
So fleet repairs within the budgets as an expense item, the individual budgets.
In the general fund, all the fleet parts are in this budget, but if you're a utility type fund, like a parking, transit, wastewater, the ones I operate with, they have their own budget for parts.
Okay.
So you can track those separately. we call it, what if, besides utility fund, we call them something else?
Enterprise.
Enterprise fund, I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So that's central maintenance. I keep hitting the wrong budget, or part here. The next one, Public Works Administration. Basically, that's myself and a couple office staff downstairs. And again, just the same format, just looking at 18 to 20, about a 3% differential in the budgets from those 2 years. Basically, all the fuel in Public Works resides in this budget, so it's one of our bigger line items. So we try to recalculate that and do some forecasting on it every year, or we do that every year. And so typically you see a little growth in there. We had to cut that back for a 7% cut. But it's, again, kind of a guesstimation and art form. I know Britt, he does that for us, and he goes out and looks at a lot of different websites and estimating tools, and we're trying to forecast for all next year. This is back when we started this back in February. So it's a little bit of a guesstimate, but that's where we got that cut in that. And for 2020, just some just kind of a goal of mine for our group in administration is continue with our employee engagement through our in-house core trainings and our mission and value trainings. I mentioned that we have 130 employees in Public Works, and so we had a lot of turnover, a lot of retirements recently, and so we had a lot of new folks. And a couple years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago now, but anyway, we started doing some in-house trainings to kind of focus on maybe people's softer skills and how they interact with the public and internally. It's pretty important. You got 130 people running around the community. They have a lot of point of contact with the public, and so to make sure that goes well or in a certain way, we really try to get out in front of that and talk to folks about how those interactions ought to look like. And we do that in-house. It's something we can't send everybody out for, but it's we try to do at least 4 times a year, have a sit down and keep in front of people. And if you don't do it repetitively, people get off track. Or if we're going to get off track or things happen, if it happens, we try to address it very quickly. And we try to, during those, we also try to point out, basically, we'll get good feedback too. So we try to point out and show everybody, hey, look what this person, how their interaction went, so they can learn from that and, hopefully get that good customer service. Doesn't always happen, but we try to correct it when it doesn't. Just a couple quick performance stats. Mainly they're filtered in the other divisions, but in these stats, expenditures versus budget, what we're spending versus budget, and making sure we're keeping our employees that are authorized, trying to keep those jobs filled so we can keep the workflow going is what we're kind of looking at here. A couple of them.
Okay.
Any questions about that?
No, go ahead.
Engineering. So, and you can see the differential 2020, 2018. There was some capital in it in 2018, a couple pickup trucks. So I took those out for comparison's sake because basically it's people and operations. So in engineering, you got people, you have construction inspectors. Besides engineers, you have construction inspectors, surveyors, some technicians that do stormwater, things like that. And so you can see the budget growth there over the 2-year time frame. And so with those kind of expenditures, certainly 7% cut, there were no big items that we could look at or growth items. So we tried to just go through and kind of whittle off of several items there. I mentioned a few there. One of the goals, obviously, for engineering every year is we always try to get a timely and professional implementation of our CIP projects and get those funds that are coming in back out onto the street or into the street, and stormwater pipes and whatever else we're doing. And, of course, then there's the development oversight that goes along with that. Construction inspection staff are highly involved in that, and some of our engineers, and then our stormwater compliance as well. And then with stormwater, we also have a component where we go out and meet with people a lot and try to offer some advice on how to, if they have a stormwater issue. So that's a big thing we do in engineering as well.
So going back to the 7% cut, stormwater compliance, exactly what is that?
Yeah. So, I don't know, several years ago when we got our new permit, and that's not all of the 2,400. I think we had, I can look here real quick, I'm just talking, but I think it was around 2,000 or 1,500 we had stormwater compliance. And one of our things, we're supposed to do educational events and stormwater compliance that, maybe for kids at the Capitol on Arbor Day or something like that. And so we've cut some of those back, and, we would, in something like that, we might have a storm drain stenciling project where we'd buy supplies for Boy Scouts or something. So we didn't always spend all that money, but so again, we just kind of took off some of those. I think on some of the printing and advertising, we're trying to shift that over into the CIP. A lot of that's related to, we're advertising a capital improvement project. We can take that out of the capital improvement sales tax, things like that. On their performance, theirs are a little sparse, maybe on the performance measures compared to some of them, not as maybe not as interesting or something. But anyway, we look at project overruns. Why are we having those? Are they related to, do we expand the job while we're there, or do we get a good price? For example, we have a change order coming up, hopefully on one of the future council agendas very soon, where we're working with the water company to add some sidewalk over off Boonville Road. Now that's a change order because we have a contractor that's working for the water company, but he also has a contract with us for sidewalk in Missouri Boulevard. So we're trying to just take advantage of that economy of scale. Why he's there doing some of the repair for the water company, and he's redoing driveways, well, we can connect sidewalks in between, so we both save, or we save the money, really.
So it wasn't a situation of poor planning or poor estimates, it was an expansion of really the work.
Right, yeah. So, you look at those, and again, just tracking those and kind of seeing how we're doing in that. And then there's another one about accidents in city right-of-way. Now, that's some dated material, but it's always good if you see maybe a hot spot on a city street. Now, most of the time, we have a GIS is very good about helping us, and one of our engineers works with them about loading some accident data, and the police department as well sits in or gets with that group. And if we see maybe a high accident location on a city street, that's kind of a red flag. We would look at that. Is there some engineering thing we could do to help that, or is it just happenstance? It may just be happenstance, and a lot of them actually are on state routes such as Missouri Boulevard, things like that. But it's always good to look.
I personally like the idea that the engineering department looks at highway safety. Clearly a goal. Are you shifting to another department?
Yeah, I can. More questions, go ahead.
Just one question I would have is what major engineering projects did you complete this year and anticipated for next year or coming up?
Well, this will just be off my memory. I didn't jot that down. But obviously one of our major projects we're working on is Duncan Street Bridge, and we hope to complete it later this year.
You engineered that internally?
No, that was a Bartlett West design.
Okay. But now you're doing East High, right?
Well, that would get started this year, but go into next year for most of the construction, probably end up in the spring.
And we're hiring out engineering on Dunklin and Clark?
Yeah, that just started. Now we finished the track. When you talk about some of these engineering projects, there's multiple phases in it. Sometimes it's traffic engineering first, which is the Dunklin and Clark just got completed. We just did the design contract, and they're getting started on the design of Dunklin and Clark. I think maybe within a month ago at the council meeting that got approved. And so obviously, now you got also, sometimes on these bigger projects, we're doing the engineering, 2-3 years in advance of when the money's going to be available. So we have to look at the cash flow, the sales tax, things like that. We did some other quite a bit of stormwater projects through engineering this year. We had some money available where we did a lot of pipelining. So if we could find a pipe that could be lined instead of open cut the street, we tried to do that, and we teamed up with Wastewater, who's also doing a big pipelining project for economy of scale there. And so where maybe our in-house staff will go out and fix the inlets or manholes, and so that we can line the pipe in between. We also did some bid projects. One of them was Mesa. So that's something that our in-house crews wouldn't normally do. It's a pretty big, basically a box culvert or a great big concrete pipe. It's just finished up. And then one over on Chickadee, same thing. Kind of a complicated, it's a small little pipe in a cul-de-sac, but there's a lot of stuff in there when you get digging around in some of these existing streets.
Okay, proceed.
The next one is the street department. I've kind of tacked on the word stormwater. If you look at the budget 2 years prior, and I took out capital, and so you have a 4.3% increase over those 2 years. But what happened was in 19 we added the stormwater crew, and so that was 3 positions, so a full crew that was added. And if you look at that year to year, a couple percent we've added to that budget, and we're getting a lot of work out of that deal where our crews have been out. And one indicator of that, which isn't in our performance measures necessarily, but just complaints that I've been receiving from you guys and just the public in general, have tailed off a bit, and about holes maybe in their yard or out in the street or something like that, although I got one tonight from Mr. Schreiber. So they're not gone, but we've made good headway on some of that work, and we'll continue to do so. Same, but along with that, doing a lot of street repairs, so we're getting back to that. Now, I think we just gave a presentation, Public Works Committee this week, about we are pretty far behind. So we started getting a lot of comments about street repair, potholes, just rough streets, whatever. Obviously, we had the big tornado that took a lot of manpower and considerable manpower. So we basically shifted everybody out of street and stormwater, went to the tornado, took wastewater people. We had other cities helping us. So we are way behind, but we're back at it now. Of course, the flood is also taking its toll. We're kind of off that a little bit. That's yet to be seen how that's going to end up. In this budget, one of the big items is materials, which is basically the pipe, concrete, asphalt, stone, that kind of stuff. It's a big number in the budget, but we tried to hit some other items there for our 7% cut, weed control. That's where we've got spray, roadsides we take care of, things like that. Street light install, this come up in Mr. Hensley's ward recently. We usually put about 1,000, 1,500 in for street light. If somebody petitions the city for a new street light, it's not a lot of money, and sometimes it gets spent, sometimes it doesn't. Signs and paint, get more life out of that. So that's where we filtered that cut. The goal for 2020 is obviously get back on our concrete street repair and stormwater repair, and then again, keeping up with our maintenance. We do some maintenance, keep cleaning the machinery and things like that, keep that aging fleet as good as we can. Then some performance stats. Obviously, we look at if you look at the budget book, there's a lot in there, but I just chose a few of them that are some indicators. But we like to look at snow removal hours. How much time do we spend that? Because if we're not if we're doing a lot of snow, it may affect how much stormwater we could do over the winter time. You can actually do a lot of stormwater work in the winter if there's no snow on the ground. It's cold, but you can still launch, you can still dig. Square yard pavement repair, if that ebbs and flows a little bit, did we have a heavy winter or something like that, or were there things like the tornado and flood that affected that? Certainly this year there would be, so that number's going to be less. Number of lane miles of surface treatment, that relates to the overlay. I think we're going to be about 12 this year, a little over 12, so a lot of that's basically based on cost of what the asphalt is, and that comes out of the CIP, but this group administers it. And so just some indicators. If we see that number is creeping down, obviously our repair number is going to go up, because instead of overlay, you're getting a repair on some of those streets. And that's predominantly asphalt streets I'm talking about there. Yeah.
I was noticing that your number of year-to-date snow removal hours was like 3,800 versus...
What page are you on there?
That'd be 248. Last year, this last winter was a lot of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget how many incidents you had. It was listed somewhere, like 13 or so.
Yeah, like I said, that's just all weather dependent, but one indicator, like I said, we like to look at it, and obviously we all realize, I remember promising somebody I wouldn't complain about mowing grass this summer because, the hard winter, but it was an especially difficult winter, so we spent a lot of money there and man hours and doing that, and we track all these hours as just a matter of fact. All those hours whether we're doing flood or tornado or whatever, we're always tracking what we're doing from a man-hour standpoint, just so we can kind of see how that workflow is going.
With that many incidences, are we back up to 100% in terms of reserve for chemicals?
And actually in this budget, so what happened, we put in a chemical number, and it's another big number in this budget. Now, we didn't cut that in our 7% cut, but what happened was after we put the budget together, the bid actually came in lower for chemicals this year, which we did not expect because there was such a hard winter last year, so it was kind of an unusual deal, and so that really helped us out. And so we had enough kind of to get by our average again and get filled back up.
So that explains
So
why.
we're kind of starting where we need to, like we always do, and as we go through the winter, let's say we have another 3,000-hour winter, and we hope not, we might have to come back in and look at adding money to that chemical budget.
Councilman Prather.
With the tornado and the flooding, I think you had mentioned we might be behind on the resurfacing.
Yeah, well,
overlays.
So yes, kind of and no. So part of it is the city we finally got our work done, the city crews related to overlay. And so that's the first step. And so we got that done very quickly. We shifted a bunch of people to that to get out of the company's way that's going to do it, Capital Paving. Of course, Capital Paving was affected by the flood as well, so they had to move their plant over to the stadium quarry, and so they're backed up, obviously. And so I think we've given a notice to proceed here in August, and so they have to be done by basically, I always say, Thanksgiving time frame. If you're not done by Thanksgiving, you're probably not going. It's going to be too cold for the asphalt to go down, and so that's kind of just a rough idea. No matter what the weather has been in the last few years, you can always almost lay asphalt till Thanksgiving. So they have till about that time. We hope they get in and get out and get complete pretty quickly, but it's kind of based now on their workflow as well.
Okay. Mr. Schreiber.
Yes, sir. Number 8 on page 248 regarding the number of street signs replaced, 2019 512, 2020 600. Is that based on the tornado and flood?
Yeah, because you'll see that's already equal to 2018, and this is based as April 30th. So again, just I think Chief Schofield said, we do this twice a year almost, basically, because we do a half year for these performance measures in April because we're only halfway through the budget, and so the guys had replaced a bunch of signs now, or April 30th. Obviously, it hadn't happened yet, but they went out, must have purchased a bunch or anticipating something here, but I suspect that number would go up quite a bit for this night. It will be in 19s next year, so you'll see that number probably jump a lot. And it looks like from the trends, probably 600 is a good average, 500 to 600. But I would say that's going to change for this year.
Do we have a lot of replacement necessary due to theft of signs or vandalism of signs, or is that?
We have some of that, but it's not the predominant need. We know the reflectivity anymore, it's a big deal, and so we want to go out and our sign guys are very good about checking those, and they have a little tool they use to do that, and so going about and replacing those. So even this, I'm not sure if this number got changed, even though it says April 30th. I suspect it might have somehow at the last minute, but maybe not. Maybe they got out early this year, but that number is going to grow, certainly.
The only two things that really stood out in your budget that was the chemicals, $100,000 less on chemicals, and you explained that, I believe. But then there's $50,000 less for electricity. Is that just utilities? Is that?
Well, I think finance does a calculation for us, I think, on that margin. And that might be related to the water issue.
No, this is related to the street lights. So the replacement of the street lights with the LEDs been showing a downward trend on those costs.
Okay.
Yeah, and when we have a new project, we always go with LED lights, and we're also in the budget, our maintenance forces are converting city-owned lights to LED as well, slowly over time.
Okay. Steve?
Can I also just mention what I mentioned at the very beginning of the budget discussions, and that is that there's going to be, without a doubt, a lot of movement of money within different line items of the different departments. And department directors certainly do that anyway, but I think with the 7% cut, there's even going to be more of that. So just because there's a particular number, and we try to stay within that number, but obviously if something like electricity goes over, then they're going to have to make some adjustments to that. There's just no opportunity and no other options.
But to follow up on that, the option as planned with this budget isn't to dip into the fund balance.
No, and they don't anyway, and other than unless it's something extraordinary. Yes,
Okay.
correct. Yeah, with existing funds, within the existing funds. Now, there may be something big that comes up, hopefully not another tornado, but something that comes up that may necessitate making that proposal to the council, but right now it's anticipated to make it through the existing budget,
Okay, go ahead.
whatever you all end up eventually adopting.
I just keep it going now into the, I always want to say utility funds. Enterprise funds. Anyway, so the next one's airport, and it's a little further back in the book. You got to get through a couple other items. Get you the page number real quick, unless somebody else got it. Andy?
271.
There you go. Basically, same drill. In 2018, in some of these, they used to calculate depreciation, and so that was just kind of a calculation, and so we don't do that anymore, so I just had to take that out of there to compare the two budgets, about a 2.2% over those 2 years. In total budget at the airport, it's basically 3 people, and running our airport is what goes on over there. And because it is a smaller budget, just kind of had to scatter that 7% now. And this is because this is a utility fund, our enterprise fund, but the general fund does kick in money to this, so it included a 7% cut in this case. And so we had to scatter that about several operational items, chemicals, building grounds, etc. However, as we all know, we have issues with flood there, so kind of, I don't know, everything's kind of off the table on this one. I didn't really even include performance stats because we're going to be way out of whack on all of those, obviously. Couldn't get to the records really to do some of them for you. They're still boxed up. But the goal for 2020 is obviously flood recovery. Got a call, a voicemail before I came up here, must have stepped out, and he was from the guy from the FAA calling me about trying to get some fiber back in, so it's a very fluid project over at the airport. Things happen every day. A lot of things out of our control, a lot of other agencies involved, especially with the FAA. They're a little hard to pin down some days. But I think we're doing pretty good for what we have had go on there. Obviously, we talked to the Public Works Committee about this earlier in the week, or last week. The terminal will have to come down. It exceeded our 50% value on our floodplain code, so the terminal will have to be torn down and removed. It's moldy. We haven't done anything with it, so more yet to come on that. But I think our insurance will help cover the costs on that actual tear down. The tower, though, came in under that, so we were actually able to repair the tower, and that was what the FAA called me about today. So just to get it up and running again, our lighting was working. As last I heard, it does have some rusty connections because of being submerged so long. So hopefully that stays working for a while, but it might be some of that has to be replaced. Now, airports typically have a lot of grant funding available for them at very low matching dollars, and I think hopefully we'll be successful in getting some state aviation funds to help us repair some of our fencing and things like that were damaged during the flood. So at really no matching cost there. So that's good.
Any questions?
Can I just reiterate something that Matt mentioned, and that is this was really done pre-tornado and flooding, mostly flooding in this particular case. So, there's going to be some numbers in here that are just not accurate, even as an estimate, flowage fees and leases and those kinds of things. So, it's just
Yeah, that's why I didn't even really include them. That last bullet point, they're all out of whack.
And it's hard to even estimate right now what the
Right.
impact will be
Correct.
on those kinds of things.
Yeah, rent or lease, whatever you want to say, is a great example. For example, got a restaurant in the terminal. That gentleman has moved locations already. Obviously, hadn't had a restaurant since the flood, which occurred basically to the Levees Breach right about the time the tornado hit. And so flowage fees, they were down for a few weeks, so that's going to be down. That's a major source of revenue. And people stopping off to get their fuel, so we had to get back open quickly. So we're getting back there, but it's going to be kind of out of whack.
Any questions? Okay. I guess
Parking's next.
parking?
Now, I did compare these two in parking, but it's a little different, and I can explain the difference here. So in 18 to 20, there's a 20% difference there, but most of that is facility related. So in parking, we don't necessarily have it like a CIP at a separate budget where other groups might. They're kind of filtered into building and grounds and things like that. So in this year, we are trying to update some of our parking lots, with overlays, things like that, do some major maintenance to our existing garage, things of that nature. So that's why that looks a little out of whack. The same personnel are there that have always been there. The 7% cut, no cut was required, as no general fund dollar subsidized this fund. So we're doing our parking thing. I think we already went over the fund balance. Margie did, I believe, early on about basically we're still got a healthy fund balance there, but again, that we're trying to reserve that and look at opportunities to create new parking downtown, which that's my goal, one of the goals. We're doing finishing up some studies, and we've actually contacted some property owners here lately about some of that. And so we hope to move projects forward about creating additional parking in that downtown core area. One item to note: our parking supervisor, Buck or James Wilson, whatever you refer to him as, retires October 4th. So we'll be getting a new parking supervisor there. I think he's been here about 10 years, I want to say. And so that's one of our, it's always a good opportunity or a challenge, however you want to look at that when somebody retires like that we've had for a while. And then change in ticket writing. This kind of came up the other day, and I was a little caught off guard by it, but the ticket writing system, again, something in that budget up there, we need to update to some newer technology to improve the interface with court. So the new ticket writers we're looking at will do that, and basically they write the ticket and it kind of talks to court all at the same time. So that's going to be much improved. Right now it's kind of clunky. You got to go back in at the end of the day, download the thing. Hopefully somebody still at court can accept it, or it's just a little clunky, I guess I would say. But it's old technology we've had for a long time. And one of the things, I think a question come up, and Ron Fitzwater's not here, we are not doing that license plate reader. That was discussed a little bit, but just the way the ticket writers work, and like I said, the folks kind of talking license plate numbers. Basically, right now it's a little bit of a manual entry type thing. If we have an issue, we manually enter those spaces in per block in this old ticket writer, but it'll be similar in the new ticket writer technology. So it's what many other cities are doing in this regard. So there's no issues with saving people's license plate numbers or something like that.
Any questions? I had one comment that our enforcement downtown is very efficient. I think that was a compliment. I'm going to take it that way.
And I forgot, I got a couple of performance stats here. Utilization, obviously, times 3. So that's metered and time limit spaces on the street, and then lease parking, whether it's in a lot or garage. And one of the things we like to look at, if metered or time limit on-street parking is greater than 35%, 35, 40, somewhere in there, our goal is 35, that people feel like there's not maybe a parking opportunity for downtown. So keeping that utilization kind of in that time frame. So what happens is if we're creeping above that, we probably need some more leased or parking garage type space available. So that's one of our indicators we like to look at. Garage at capacity. Now that's a low number if you look at the performance stat, but basically what that is during session, that number, I think it says 1% or 1.2 or 2% or something like that. But basically that number kind of continues to grow, and that just means there's more activity going on downtown, whether it's related to the Capitol, but certainly that is growing. and those spaces aren't available. Now, you go down there today, I'm sure you get a parking space, but the session's not in. But we're trying to accommodate that kind of rush for the city at those 6 months or so. Snow removal hours, again, kind of similarly, we like to look at that, how many citations are issued, because the people issuing the citations are also the snow removal crew. So if we have big snows, obviously that you can see that reflected sometimes in those. And it's just an indicator of the job, how many people are on the street. You know, with a small group like this, we take one person out due to an illness or something like that, you can really have a dip in some of those numbers. So, and more about just if there's a change, we kind of try to evaluate why that was. Question? One more. I think I got one more here. Oh, no, I got a couple more. Okay, transit. So transit actually had a negative budget over the last 2 years, and when you take out the capital and depreciation out of the main budget, and because there is a general fund contribution, there was 7% cut here, but it kind of is a little different in the fact that it has a revenue budget as well as an expense budget. So, you know, some of that, our bus ads were up, and we've always kept that low, but we're seeing more ads on our buses. It's a small number, but it still helps a little. Medicaid payments seems to be increasing up, and that's basically handy wheel related. Then again, we cut some building and grounds, which has moved into CIP, which we just talked about at the Public Works Committee last week, doing some more or less things maybe we might have had in building and grounds in the past, trying to shift that and use some of those CIP dollars and get some grants for some of those as well if we can. And then the chargeback was also reduced by the formula. So what happens is finance does a little magic formula over the whole city budget versus this budget, and boom, comes out a number that what is the chargeback. And so that went down a little bit. So that kind of explains the 2% reduction over a couple of years. One of the goals, 2020, basically we had a whole list of projects we were going to match with that grant matching, and you know, really, to be honest about it, the facilities at Central Maintenance and Transit, which are all built together, kind of at the end of their useful life. They're quite old, out of date, and I haven't even talked about pink sheets, but anyway, so just a lot of repairs needed, constant repair, and so you know, one of them, for example, was replace the guts of the vehicle wash. Well, that lasts a few years, and you got to do it again, or you'd be surprised how many doors we go through down there, and just things of that nature, or how many roof leaks we have, all those kind of things. So at some point, we did a study, I think it was 10 years ago, before I was over transit even, I was helping with it though, about looking at new transit facilities somewhere, and we probably need to dust that off and try to go for some grants on that. One of the things is you really got to have, you can't get a grant from FTA for the design, but if we were to do a design of one, and then we'd be in line for getting a grant potentially. So I'd probably recommend in the future, I haven't included it in this budget or anything, but it's something through the CIP maybe we could work on through the transit funds to get that going eventually here. I have some performance things. Any questions here? So, you know, obviously it's always good to look at our cost per trip, and a lot of that is just, you know, how many rides we have in that year, and then whether it's handy wheels or regular routes. And a lot of it, you know, there's fixed cost to operating the buses. If we have 6 routes, you always have a driver, you always have fuel, and what is the budget. But if the number of rides are dropping, so a lot of times you see in a good economy, bus trips drop, which we've been in for a couple of years now. And so the number of rides are actually going down a little bit, which makes your costs go up. So we look at that to see if there's a reason for that. And, you know, we're trying things. Our partnership with Lincoln, I think, has been very successful. I think even this summer, I think we've been going on that, I want to say a year and a half maybe. And that's been a great partnership. And I think we're still in the 500 range. I know Mark and I talk about that number about once a month. We look at that. And, you know, the school year pops back up. So, you know, whether that's people going down to Missouri Boulevard to shop or maybe eat lunch somewhere or dinner. The students can get on there just by showing their ID, and then Lincoln reimburses us for that later. And so, or maybe they have a job somewhere too. They could go, a part-time job somewhere they could get to. And then we always look, obviously, at our fare revenue, and that's basically people paying to get on the bus, whether it's, fixed routes, handy wheels. We have reduced fares. There's 4 different fares there. But just kind of looking at those to see where we're at. I mentioned one of our things to the Public Works Committee. We are changing our one of the projects in that list was to change our fare system, and so modernize it. Right now, it's punch cards and cash, and so one of the things, if you were to change the fare, people got to make change. The bus drivers got to make change and all that. So with a new fare system that we're hoping to get, you could go and say get like a little credit card and load it with $10 and swipe your card. So if the council ended up wanting to make a 3-cent change in the fare, you wouldn't have to make that change. We'd hope most people would come and just fill a card up with a certain amount of dollars and then swipe it as they go. And so that would give you that flexibility in the future to do smaller incremental changes. So haven't implemented that yet, but that's one of the projects we were talking about doing. Of course, it's not in the budget. Print that we're changing the fare here today, unless you guys want to. So that's transit. I think now I got wastewater.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah. So wastewater, it was hard. Wastewater again. It's because it's so large compared to like a parking. Basically, all the capital's mixed up in the budget, so it's hard to compare budget to budget. So I didn't do that in this one. But basically, the revenues have been flat. Haven't had any rate increase since 2017, so we'll be going on 3 years of that come next year. Revenue is $13 million. Of that, $6 million is bond payments, and these are rough numbers. And then there's additional. Then we have a fund balance of $3.5 million, so that's a little over 25%. Now that ebbs and flows based on our capital needs. We may have something in design, like we have a repair going on over by Missouri River we're going to spend some money on, more than likely here coming up real quick. And so that number is going to move around a little bit, but we do have a nice fund balance for those emergency needs that come up. And then the bond covenants require you to have a certain amount of restricted fund balance, which is in addition to the 3.5. And so there's a good amount of money there. But one of the things we are doing this next year, it was in the budget this year, we're just getting it started. I suspect it'll drift into next year, but having a consultant doing a financial study, evaluate the future needs of our rates, and look at that if there's any future adjustments needed. And I suspect there would be, just increased costs with everything. Expenses, again, that's why I didn't include the comparison, but no 7% cut on this one, just no general fund dollars subsidize this fund. And again, wastewater is about treating the wastewater and keeping up with the capital needs and keeping it in good working order. So we don't want to have a utility that gets far behind, and you hear some of those in the news as of late, drinking water systems and things in various places. And if they defer, you can defer capital, sure, you don't notice it this year, but if you're not charging and keeping up with that, it can really bite you in the end. So I think we do a pretty good job of trying to keep up with that in Jefferson City. Some of the stats to kind of help us with that, we're always looking at overflows and why we have those. Sometimes it's just a big rain and something happened in the system. But if we have, and you're going to have sanitary sewer overflows out of manholes or wherever, you can't expect that. With so many miles of sewer, there's an expectation number on that. But if we're exceeding that by a great number, of course, the state's going to ask us about it. Are we not cleaning our lines properly, or what's going on here? Are we not it could be we're not implementing our grease trap program adequately, so we get a lot of grease buildup in certain lines. And so that we're trying to really emphasize that, looking at grease traps. But again, looking at percent of pipes cleaned every year, number of sewer or miles. In the performance measure, says number of miles of sewer. It should have the word maintained behind it, so just never got added. And that's why that number moves around. So we're not decreasing the number of sewer miles or adding to it. But anyway, and that could be anything from not only just pipe cleaning, but jetting, televising, I&I, that kind of thing. I&I is infiltration of water, so that when it rains, water wants to get in the pipes and then they overflow. So we're doing a lot of pipelining to take care of that over the last several years. And then also gallons of wastewater treated, so that all is weather dependent. A lot of that's weather dependent because there is ion infiltration into the system, but we also have other folks maintaining lines that come into the city. Old Summit, for example, we have a flow meter on that, and they're allowed a certain amount of that, but if we're seeing spikes in I&I, especially with the flood, we know we need to be talking to those folks. And that's kind of the brief overview. The thing I'll say about pink sheets, all the wastewater pink sheets were funded in this budget. The majority of pink sheet items were really equipment related, and those were more or less. I mean, we tried to do a fair job when a truck hit its useful life or a piece of equipment, put them in here. We probably could have put some more, but we cut that off. I think streets was about $850 worth of capital, $850,000. Had a couple inspection vehicles, staff vehicle, and engineering. We did have one person in CM. Just there seemed to be taking longer to get to our repair, so we did include a mechanic here. That's not the one that just quit. This would be an additional one is all. Of course, we understand, there's limitations with the budget this year of capital, but that's kind of the highlights of that. So basically, you have to answer any questions about that. But
Questions? What is the current, couple things on your performance? Number one, is that an error on number 6, page 300, in terms of waste accepted from waste haulers?
well,
For
that
gold?
number went down. Is that? I mean, get there. Is 300? You say?
It went from 407.
What page was that again?
300.
Here, let me get right there.
Item 6 on workload.
Yeah.
Goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we had some issues with, as some have been on the council for a while, at our plant and some of our land application issues. So we shut off the waste haulers, essentially, and so there might have been some suspect loads coming in. So we had to change how we were doing that, and so we wanted to back that off for this meeting.
Wait, unless I'm reading this wrong, you say back off. And it going up to from 470,000 to 2 million?
Yeah, that number seems like it's probably got
Another zero in there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I figured it'd be
Yeah,
that.
okay, I see what you mean. I thought you meant this current year.
Yeah. And in terms of overall capacity of that plant to be able to treat, are we at 50%, 75%?
I don't know the percent off the top of my head, but we have a good amount of capacity there. That's why we were able to work with Holt Summit a couple years ago, I think it was, and St. Martin's. Certainly we have good capacity there. We're always watching that, and but our plan is working well right now.
Okay. And it never flooded, correct?
Never flooded, so after 93 it was raised, and there was a big expansion done at wastewater, and that's what a lot of those bonds are related to as well, that we're still paying on, is that it was elevated. So I took a ride, I guess it was the National Guard gave some of us a ride out there in a troop transport that could drive through 6 feet of water. So some of the plant staff have been there a long time, and they know the drill. You put some stakes out along the road so the vehicle can follow the road, not get off in the field. That would be bad. But anyway, yeah, we had water up to the doors and drove out, and we took some summer help with us to mow the lawn and check the plant, make sure it's operational. Of course, when you have that much flood water, your testing is usually pretty good because you do have a lot of infiltration. But we kept the plant in compliance at all times, and staff went over. I only went the one time, but yeah, so you kind of looked out over a big sea of water in the fields.
Okay. Any questions? I think we're good. Ready to move on to the next?
That's That's all of Waste, or that's all of Public Works, unless you have any questions.
I guess not. It looks like police, we're up to police. Thank you.
Thanks.
I also want to thanks, now that I attend some of the Public Works and Planning, is some of the information providing the flood impact, and especially our help from our neighbors to the north, so appreciate those updates. Chief,
Thank you.
you ready to go? Yeah.
If you don't mind, maybe we could go smallest budget to largest budget, just considering that there may be more attention given to the larger ones, or we can do whatever you wish, of course.
Council's desire.
We have 5 budgets that we manage. They are the general fund, the largest one, where all the police, most of the police officers are. We have an SRO budget, a Mustang budget, 911 budget, and a animal control budget. The smallest one that we manage is the Mustang budget. Mustang is basically fighting drug abuse and the related crime matters. The amount of that budget is $188,196 if you round it a little bit. We have 2 officers assigned to that program. And I think there was this year, the adjustment is, how much, 5,000? I think it was $5,055 was the total adjustment requested. And that would be because of personnel. It's really, there were no performance measures assigned to that program, and it's pretty straightforward, so I'd be happy to entertain any questions about our Mustang program.
Seeing none, go ahead and proceed.
The second smallest is the SRO budget, School Resource Officer budget. That is, that totals $641,144.59. We have 8 officers assigned to to SRO. They are assigned to specific schools, most of them within the school district. The expense,
I want to make sure of the number that we're using, the 2020, is that right?
that was 19, because I didn't think 20 was accepted yet. So we were using last year's.
Oh, I thought, okay. I thought you were just saying this is what the budget is for 2020.
No, we're not making that assumption at all. We're just addressing what, within the constraints of this year and how we're working and that type of thing. So there's not a whole lot of difference, is there? No. Okay. So the SRO budget is one that is funded 50% City of Jefferson, 50% the school district. There were no performance measures assigned to that program. And what is the adjustment? The requested increase totaled $1,084.64, right? So, again, that's pretty straightforward. Are there any questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So if
Councilman Brown.
if I'm looking at this right, under the SRO, at the end of this year to be 641, but next year to be 681, which is an additional $40,000. Is that increase? Is that an officer making 80,000, or is that because the increase is 40,000? So how is that? How is that calculated?
There was a correction in which officers were assigned to the SRO program. Last year, we added one at the request of Dr. Linthicum.
Right.
but the right officers or the correct officers weren't assigned to that program for budgeting purposes. So that correction was made, and that resulted in the change in the figures
So we're adding one additional for
last year.
for Capital City West for next year, too.
We
better-
will, not at this point, we will split our 2 officers presently assigned to the high school.
Okay.
One will remain at Jefferson
Gotcha.
City, and the other will go to Cap.
So we currently have 2 at the current high school?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. All right, I understand that. Thank you.
I do have a follow-up question, too, with regard to salary. The requested by the department is $591, and it ended up being quite a bit higher than that. It's under personnel. I'm not sure if I understand the reason
Yeah.
why the requested versus the recommended is higher.
I'll field that if that's okay, Chief.
Yes.
The department director column, if you look at the salaries of 351, that number comes directly from a report that we pull out of our Springbrook system, and it goes by the department that an officer is assigned to. And we realized after we gave the numbers to the chief for the department director requested column that there was an officer missing, that he had been assigned to an incorrect department. So that's one of the corrections. And then the other impact is the increase in the overtime line to reflect something more actual, instead of going with the 17,000 that was in the budget last year and under the department director requested, we increased it to reflect more along the lines of what has been paid in overtime, because the reimbursement from the schools comes on the budgeted amount. So we wanted to make sure we got as close to actual on those kinds of line items as we could.
Okay. Councilman Graham.
So does the increase in overtime, does that reflect for the football games that the officers are attending, or basketball games in which we have officers present? Is that overtime, is that a part of this?
Yes.
It is.
Yes, they do a lot of those extra kinds of assignments, so that is included in that figure.
Okay. And the school doesn't pay half of that overtime
What do they?
salary, do they?
Do they?
The school's reimbursement is based on our budget. So that's why we wanted to make sure and
Gotcha.
reflect what we were actually paying in overtime, so that the school will be participating in that overtime.
Gotcha. So this will be split. Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah, the 681, excuse me.
yes.
Council Lady Ward, did you have a?
No, he asked the question.
Okay. Questions for SRO? I think, move on to your next one, Chief.
We can discuss animal control. That program employs 6 full-time employees, and then it has a lot of volunteers that help us out at various times during the week, doing various kinds of tasks. I think as we look at that program and the performance of the program, it's, I think, most important to us to gauge the number and percentage of redemptions and adoptions that we succeed in finalizing, returning the redemptions, meaning returning the animal to the original owner, and of course adoptions, a new owner, new family. And we're very happy as we review those figures to find that we generally stay above the 80 percentile in returning animals to the owner or getting new adoptions, and that seems to be the industry standard. If one can maintain an 80% redemption/adoption rate, then that's considered a successful program, and that's what we've managed to do pretty much year in and year out, and that's consistent with our goals and objectives, and particularly with that program, and so we're happy with that. If I could, maybe just save the pink sheets to the end and include all those at the same time, or would you like to address those as we go through the budgets?
Some nods on that, that'd be fine.
Okay. Well, are there any questions about animal control? I will say the county contributes $100,000 to our budget for that program also.
And I believe at our last public safety meeting, I believe you reported that the fee for adoption of an animal was increased.
Yes.
And do we know, is that reflective in here at all?
Well, on the revenue side, it would be.
Yeah, it's a revenue line item that when we went through the revenues, I pointed out it was like $43,000 increase.
There's a $43,000 increase we're anticipating?
Yes. So we researched the central Missouri area so that we wouldn't be out of whack, be consistent with what kind of
Gotcha.
going rate was, and discovered that that hadn't been adjusted for many years. And so that new fee was implemented, and we've received no complaints.
Good.
Happily.
There are no further questions. We'll have you go ahead and move to your next section, which would be,
Go to 911.
okay?
That's a little bit over $1.5 million. It is funded at a 25% rate by Cole County. We employ 20 operators. That is broken out with 17 true communications operators and 3 supervisors. That rate or the number has been consistent for about the last 15 years. When we look at 911, one thing that's important to us are the number of phone calls we receive, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to secure that number because we have to rely upon the phone company, and they've not been able to provide those numbers. So we're still working now. We could get them on a monthly basis, but that isn't very efficient, so we're hoping there'll be improvements made and we'll be able to provide the council with specific numbers of just how many phone calls are received within the 911 center. We know that with the advent of the cell phone, there's been a very significant increase in the number of phone calls received in that 911 center. We just don't know how many, and we wish we did. We were able to determine that, do you know about how many, several hundred calls were received within 1 hour of the tornado in that one center, staffed by a static number of people. So we were pleased that we were able to manage that type of call load. Do you know the number?
There was over, I would say around 218, it was over 200 calls within that first hour of the tornado. Out of those 200 calls, we answered all but 2 of them. Only 2 of them got bounced for Boone County.
So as I said, the performance measures really depend on statistics. I mean, gauging those to a large extent depend on statistics that we can't secure. We're working on that. We've received very few complaints regarding the performance within that center. That's another aspect that we monitor very closely. And I guess I'd be happy to field any questions about 911.
Councilman Graham.
I know Chief always asks this question, and I guess we can just break it down by 911 operators and police officers, but are we fully staffed in the 911 area? I see there's a pink sheet for 1 extra employee, but I know we're not talking about pink sheet items, but are we fully staffed in the communications area?
No. We had been very stable, just as a department in general, for the last 3 years. The 4th year, however, this year, it's been a little bit different, and we've had quite a bit of turnover. We're as short of personnel as we've been in the last 20 years, and that means 4 vacancies within the 911 center that staffs only 20 people. So you can imagine how that impacts our ability to do a really good job. I'm very proud of the 16 that remain and the good job that they do. We have recently conducted a process. I have offered employment to 3 people. 2 accepted. 1 still has a few items to kind of take care of before we can move forward, and we will remain 1 short until another process is conducted, which would be in the fall. We've been very fortunate, but not so much lately.
So we're looking at hiring 3, hopefully soon, and having the 1
Yes.
position. Because I know that is certainly the lifeline of the police officers. So I know you want to make sure you're hiring the right person for that. So what are some of the reasons why some of those operators are leaving? Are they just retirement, or is it, what is it?
Well, we had employed 1, and her husband took a job in Rolla, so they had to move. So we were about 3/4 through the 4.5-month training process. It was disheartening to lose that person after we had worked so hard to train them, and they could kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then she had to leave. In general, you have to generate interest, and I think you have to have a certain number of people walk in the door, raising their hand, saying, "I'd like to do that." And the last 5 years, the numbers have gone down significantly, and that's the post-Ferguson time frame. That's a national issue, and we've seen the numbers of applicants reduced significantly, as have other agencies around the country. So we have to generate interest. The more people that are interested, then obviously the better chance we have of finding the right person. We will not employ people just to have the positions filled.
Right.
That's one reason. Another reason that we still have 1 vacancy. We're not going to just take someone and say, great, now we hope they can complete the necessary training. The odds are they won't, and now we're wasted money and effort. So we'll start again, and no guarantee these 3 will be successful. We hope they are. We certainly have a process that's about as thorough as the one we have for police officer. They're almost identical. So it's a tough, long process, involves several months. But we do our very best to find the right people who will stay and be competent.
Glad to hear that salary wasn't one of the issues on that. So.
Well, that's always in the, of course, if we could offer more, that would be helpful. The ones that don't apply, we don't know why. Maybe Gail or maybe the Human Resource Department does. I think, did Sarah do a little research here last year or 2 years ago, where we were trying to determine, is there an underlying reason or reasons that cause people to both apply and maybe not be successful. And I don't know what she found, but we're exploring all options, and as far as reaching out and recruiting and attending fairs, and it's the same thing for communications operators it is for police officers. We work just as hard. In fact, I say, and have for many years said, it's harder to find a good communications operator than it is to find a good police officer.
Thank you, Chief.
Which one of the performance measures seem to inform you on the effectiveness of our 911 the most, and as a council, how could we draw from that as well?
When we look at 911, and that's why I pointed out the phone calls. I wish I could tell you we receive 258,000 phone calls a year in that 911 center, but I just can't do it. We tried. The volume of traffic that goes through that 911 center is amazing. And then we compare that with the number of complaints, which is also under our performance measures. What is the volume of calls, and then how many complaints do we receive? I mean, that's a comparison that is relevant, and we watch very closely. So those are, I think, the two primary items that we watch most closely.
When I was on the Citizens Police Academy, which I learned a bunch from, and we have one coming up, a plug, seems to me there was quite a few calls that were aired, people calling 911, which should have been a different number. It looks to me on performance 3 and 4, the last 3 and 4 on page 123, is the number of calls of the 911 center versus the number of calls dispatched. Is that a factor of how many calls are, I guess it'd be 14,000 calls that were made that didn't end up in a dispatch, so that was some sort of wrong use of the 911, or?
No, not necessarily. Those probably aren't captured. I would say there's many times that the operator can address the needs of the caller without dispatching an officer. It may be referring them to another agency within the city, maybe outside the city. It may be some type of question that they can answer just spontaneously on their own. So those calls are documented as calls received, but certainly don't require the dispatching of an officer to a scene, and so they're just managed. And that's probably what the difference in those two numbers really is the result of that. The management of calls by the personnel assigned to the 911 center. Because certainly there are many, many more calls where that aren't captured, that are just 911 calls, for instance, that aren't 911 calls, and they'll be asked to hang up and dispatch and call the administrative number, or hoax calls, or those types of things. Those aren't captured, and there's many of those too.
The one thing I do see in item number 2, can you respond to that? Outcome measures, item number 2 on 123. It seems a little bit below your goal. I'm looking at last year's numbers and any present numbers. And you can respond however you'd like, but is item 3, Cole County Sheriff, is that the same as Cole County EMS as well?
No. Those are two different numbers, and our problem was we didn't have voluntary response. So we kind of randomly solicited a response from certain people. I'm speaking for the division commander, who's not here, but that's what he told me, is to have numbers and to gauge our success. We reached out and said, hey, how do you feel about this? So the numbers that I have say the actual is 100%. If you're saying how many people feel that we've met the expectation, is that a different number? Or are you
I'm just
saying a
looking at
different number?
item 2.
2? I thought you said 3. So number.
But 2 and 3, and I was wondering if 3 included the Cole County EMS, which I assume that's quite a bit of the traffic for dispatch.
Do what? I think Chief Schofield has an answer.
If you're referring to item 2 from 2018, the 76.19, I think I can maybe address a little bit of that. We had a couple different conversations, not only with communications operators, but also with our staff about, what our expectations were in terms of having incomplete data or information earlier versus having complete information later. And so that's always a balancing act when we're talking about dispatching units to an emergency. And so what we told a lot of our folks is we really tried to explain to them what the charge was that we kind of posed to the communications operators, that we would prefer to have incomplete information sooner with follow-up information en route, so that we can get our resources there quicker, if that makes any sense. And so I think a lot of it was just understanding the plight of both organizations and having similar interest, and letting everybody know what the expectations were and then why, the reasons we were requesting that information sooner. Our folks may have been frustrated when they filled out this evaluation more than a year ago, almost 2 years ago now, because they're like, well, we don't have all the information. And we said, yes, that's right. You may not, because it's a very fluid, dynamic situation. And we want you to get going, and then we'll ask our communications operators to give us that information en route. And so once they understood that, I think that it probably helped with a more cohesive relationship between the agencies.
Thank you.
I think it's just having different perspectives. We work within the same system, but different outlooks and different objectives. And so I think it's a matter of communication, as so many things are. When we sat down and discussed what we were capable of doing versus what the fire department requested, then we pounded out some kind of resolution, and I think it's continuing to improve, is it not? Would that be fair?
I think that's reflected in the actual for this year at 100%.
Yeah, it's heading in the right direction. Yeah. Thank you.
I think also with support services, which includes 911 and records, there are a lot of projects underway and which relate to performance measures and the things we're trying to do better or create and for the community to provide better service. My point is I asked for a list of projects, and Lieutenant Stieferman provided a list of 40 today, and I'm not going to discuss 40 projects. I'm sure your eyes would probably start glazing over, but my point is still valid, and that is there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things we're doing, whether it's texting to 911, rave mobility, training regarding rave alerts, reconfiguring smart 911, there's enterprise CAD rebuild, we're redoing our camera system around the building, we need a tower on Rainbow Drive to improve radio efficiency, and it just goes on, and those things are related to performance and performance measures. So I just want to give you a flavor for the numbers of things that we're doing. So with that number, we can't be real efficient. We can't move forward quickly on most of them, but the wheels of progress are moving forward. So.
And maybe if you could supply us with that list at your convenience, just to see
Be happy
the
to
depth
do
of the
that.
projects.
Yeah, and maybe a
Council-
brief sentence about each one. would be
Councilman
fine.
Graham.
So where are we at on rave? I know that at Lincoln, I know that State Technical College has Rave Guardian, and we've just implemented Rave Guardian, and it's very helpful in case of emergencies and things like that. So where are we at in the process with Rave for the city of Jefferson? When can they start to actually opt in to Rave?
Well, they can now. We're close. We've been very focused on that. That's been one of our priorities. I think I'll refer to Lieutenant Stieferman, who's kind of the ramrod of that project. He's had it kind of from baby stage, and we're getting close to being done. So.
Yes, please.
As far as the internal process of RAVE, it's complete. So we are using it actively right now to page out the units, like SWAT team, robot operators. So the internal paging system of RAVE is complete. The communications operators downstairs have been trained on how to utilize the RAVE alert system, so they're utilizing that now. I'm working hand in hand with Polk County to get them to get their stuff into the system to get it usable. I've also started to work with Bill Farr. He got a little busy after the tornado.
Right.
So the RAVE prepare portion of it, working with him to try to get that implemented and going. The RAVE Smart 911 is a national program, so people can sign up for it anytime they want. They could have signed up for it before we had it. The only difference is now that we are a customer of theirs, if they put in any address in that falls inside the master address file of Cole County, they get the option to opt in for our automated alerts. Those are all live, they're working. I got one for the flash flood warning last night. So if they opt in for those alerts, they will start getting them as soon as they click on all the buttons and fill out for the account. The Smart 911 integration into our PSAT downstairs. IT is currently working with Rave Mobility to get that install on our servers done. They got to install the Rave server software in our server environment. And then once that gets done, we'll be able to start getting the integration into the PSAP. So if somebody calls 911 from a registered number, then our communications consoles will see that profile. I talked with IT this morning again. We meet every Monday morning to get status updates, and they are in the process of working with Rave to get that install done. So we hope to have that done very shortly.
Great to hear that. So, very important.
And we found out firsthand how helpful that would be post-tornado when the cell phones towers went down and we couldn't communicate with ourselves had we had Rave. We could have made a mass notification very quickly and effectively, so yeah, we can't wait either.
You're in your main budget?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The number that I have for that is general fund $7,852,345. Funds the majority of the police department, including most of the police officers. And as far as performance, first, as I looked at the performance measures, of course, what jumps out as it should is safety of the community, and really embracing the community and reaching out and working together in the interest of reducing crime, preventing crime. And so some of the things that we have done the last 6 months are working with Empower Missouri, which you of course read about in the newspaper. We had 5 listening sessions. Fortunately, 4 of those 5 sessions, they allowed us to respond to questions and interact with the audience, which was, I think, very helpful. There was a difference in the 5th one when we weren't allowed to do that, and it was a little more acrimonious. But nevertheless, that was, I think, beneficial, and we're continuing to work with that group to the extent that we can. We've also reached out to faith-based organizations. We had a meeting here just in the last 2 weeks with some of the church leaders and asked for their help and, impacting the community and their respective congregations, and saying, we can't do this on our own. We need your help, your influence. They've been very receptive, so we're hoping that makes a difference. We've looked at the number of firearms violations because of the violence seems to be growing. We discovered, in looking at those numbers, that we had into July almost 200 firearms events, or about 1 a day. Not all of them where someone is actually injured, but nevertheless some type of firearm call for service. So we always walk the tightrope of, falling off one side and not informing the community, and the other side is, causing paranoia. There's no right answer to that, but we had another shooting and stabbing, different events yesterday. There is violence in the community, and we're working very hard to quell that and to apprehend those that commit those types of crimes. So the first step is to, I guess, gauge the volume, the magnitude of the problem, which we're trying to do, utilizing, our computer system and what we can retrieve, and then how we can work with those figures to make the community safer. We've established a good rapport with the courts. An additional program they initiated about a year or 2 ago was the pretrial release program. So now we're working very closely. They've provided an active list of the people that are on pretrial release. This goes back to the bonding issue and things that have been very, much of contemporary issues in communities across the country. How is bonding used and or misused? And so a lot of people are being released now, and this is one of those means of doing that. It's called pretrial release. So then as we contact people on this particular program, then we immediately contact the county employees who manage that program, and if necessary, and it happened on a shooting yesterday, where we contacted county employees and they immediately assisted us, and we made an apprehension within a couple of hours. So that's how working together with county officials makes a difference. So
Remind me
Yes,
what a
that's-
Group A crime is. What is a Group A?
Well, it's the 8 most serious, I don't know if they're most serious crimes, but the federal government has assigned 8 crimes, which are, let's see if I can, murder, robbery, rape, burglary, theft, auto theft, arson, and assault. Those are the 8, which are classified here as type A. We call them Part 1. I'm not
Okay.
sure how Group A got there, because they've been typically Part 1 crimes, and then all the other crimes are Part 2 crimes. I might add that one difficulty we had, and it's a big one, is we're transitioning from UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting, to IBR, Incident-Based Reporting. So we won't have any comfort level in reporting the level of crime in those respective categories until at least 21, maybe 2020. To make a comparison as we enter 2020, because we began this transition January of 2019, it's a totally different system, a different mechanism to report crime. The numbers that are generated don't reflect anything close to what UCR reflected, and I'll spare you the rest of the specifics, but it's kind of a mess. Eventually, as time evolves, we'll be able to compare apples to apples. We can't do it now. It hurt us with some of these figures, and it will continue through next year. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but right now it's a mess. So can't talk too much, which of course hurts our ability to do some of these analytic things.
Questions? Okay, thank you. You're going into the budget now, I assume.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So just like previously, are we short in police officers?
Yes, sir.
I know we're 4 in 911 communications, but where are we at in the police officers or detectives or sergeants or whatever?
Yes, and maybe I wasn't clear, but in general, 2019 has seen a uptick in the number of resignations for a variety of reasons. I think, you mentioned budget earlier. We have lost 3 officers to St. Louis this year. And as you follow the recent tax-ish referendum in St. Louis County, which was passed, it increased the salaries across the board within St. Louis County and those 70 or 80 metropolitan areas significantly. Some as much as 25-30%. I don't have the exact figures, apologize for that, but it's a fact that we're losing officers to St. Louis, which was not occurring before this year. With that's luring them away, and there's nothing we can do about it. We talk about quality of life, we talk about cost of living. I think we say all the right things, but if you're a 20-something and our rate of pay is $15,000 or $20,000 less than they can make in St. Louis County, they go some. So that's what we're facing.
So what would be the actual number? The actual number
That
that we're short right now?
We were short 6, I think, and we I've offered the conditional employment to 5. So I believe when all is said and done, and we employ a animal control supervisor, Karen also left to go nursing, so, you know, a good reason, you know, but
Right.
nevertheless left us short in supervision at the animal control, with the animal control program. We will be 1 communications operator and 1 police officer short. And we've been working real hard the last 6 months to fill those positions. We're close. It has slowed down the last couple of months. We haven't seen much exodus, but, you know, that can change any day, as we know. So we're in, but of course, also, if they have to go to the law enforcement academy, it's 9 months before they're even close to being out on their own. So the people we're hiring now, I mean, we can look ahead until the spring, and maybe even late spring, before they're actually functioning as a police officer. It's a long process, and when you have a 4-month selection process, it's over a year from the time we lose someone until someone is functioning.
I do have a follow-up. So I guess on any given day, what is the average number of police officers that's on duty?
Would you respect the fact I'd rather not advertise that?
No, that's fine. Yeah, I do.
Just so that can't be
That's
used
fine.
against us,
That's
but
fine.
I'd be happy to tell you after the meeting, or
Okay,
anyone.
thank you,
but-
thank you.
I believe we're ready to dive into the budget numbers themselves. I think you said in the past, when you worked at, you were at Topeka, that 10% turnover was not uncommon for some departments, and we were way under 10%.
Or higher, yes.
That would represent 9
Right.
officers turnover year, so.
We, 16, 17, and 18, we averaged about 3.8%,
Yeah.
virtually nothing. In our world, that's nothing. Couldn't believe it happened, still can't believe it happened, enjoyed every moment of it. This year, we're on pace to be about at 12 or 13%. But that could slow down. You know, we went several months, like each of the last 3 years, without losing anyone. If that happens again this year, we might get her down to under 10%, but we'll see. Only time will tell, obviously. Did you want me to discuss the pink sheets?
Were you going to run through any line items in your budget, or are they?
They're really, it was
there's not-
pretty much a status quo budget.
Okay.
They're just very insignificant changes. We
Yeah.
can, but there's not
Yeah,
much.
at your pleasure. I'd say you can dive into the pink sheet items, followed by any comments you'd like to make with regard to the flood and tornado, how it's impacted you and your staff, as a summary.
I've got that right here, sir. When post-tornado, I can tell you that for the, from May 22nd through that pay period that concluded June 1st, about 10 days, probably more, about 10 days, we generated 1,886 and a half hours of overtime, 1,886.5 hours. Our reaction to that was to go to 12-hour shifts. We established curfew with the help of Ryan for the first 2 days, I believe, or 1 day. 2 days, 3, few days, not too much, yeah. And then we established the specific parameters in which that curfew applied, and then we broadened it a little bit each day for a series of days. Eventually, we were back to kind of normalcy in about a week. We weren't impacted as much as fire. I will also add that beyond that 1,886.5 hours, our exempt employees, the 9 lieutenants, captains, and myself, generated 580 hours. So we're up to 2,466 and a half, I think, in my head. So about almost 2,500 hours of overtime between non-exempt and exempt employees within the police department. We had to pay most of it. There was very little put on the comp time sheet. We already have thousands of hours in comp time owed already, so that's kind of with some brevity how it impacted us and what we did in response to it. Received a lot of positive comments about how that went. I think we were very pleased with our ability to work with and everyone else's willingness to work with us, to include fire and public works. It was really an extraordinary job done by all. Very proud to have been a part of that tragedy for the city, but it was pretty inspiring to see how everyone came together and I thought did an extraordinary job.
Great.
If we go to the pink sheets, we have been mentioning the need for police cars for, this is at least the third year, and predicting what next year's request would be depending on what occurred during that particular budget process. Last year we predicted we would ask for a certain number depending on how many were approved. I think we anticipated needing 23 in the next 2 years. We were able to secure 10 last year. So that's the reason, and in fact when we look at our fleet, the reason for the request for 13 this year. That total of $528,191.30 is an accumulation of the estimated cost of the Ford Police Interceptor utility vehicle plus delivery fee plus equipment. Now that's the top end. It could be less. Ford now is telling us that our equipment that we have for 2018s and before probably won't fit the 2020 Fords. Therefore, we put all new equipment in the request as a worst-case scenario, and that's what it is, the $528,000. So each year we can anticipate kind of what our needs are going to be based on mileage, if nothing else. But if you talk to Sean at Central Maintenance or any other professional, that's a good way of anticipating what the needs are going to be by looking at how many miles are in that car. Of course, we know that it also doesn't include idle wear and tear on those engines, and police cars idle a ton at various scenes with lights on and things like that. So that's when I say, and I'm about to say, those cars will average by the spring of 2020 140,276 miles. Those are running miles. That's odometer readings. That's not plus idle time. We can't gauge that. So that's
Excuse me, that number again?
140,276.46 miles. I don't know, when is that anticipated? May, April, when? Till when, though? Yeah, that would be till through June of 2020 if they're run to that point, to June. Those are pretty accurate when you look at some of the projections we had last year. That's pretty much what the cars we have now are running. It's pretty close. And I remind everybody, and we certainly respect the problems with revenue in the budget. We do, but it's also our job to be forthright about things. And the patrol takes theirs out of fleet at 50,000. Still do. We checked. And of course, it really is irrelevant what the car looks like. If the seat covers don't have wear and tear, or there's not too many scratches on the outside, it's the engine, it's the batteries, it's the suspension, the frame, all the things that get us from point A to point B safely. And sometimes they get bullet holes in them, like last Wednesday. So it's important to have reliable vehicles. As I said, it's the officer's office, and what you learn in the academy, your very first objective in responding to an emergency is to get there safely. So understand the constraints, but very, very important. Questions, or should I proceed down the list?
Yeah, Councilman Henry.
Thank you, Chief. See, you're requesting funding for 13 new police vehicles. And I believe I recall last year it was roughly the same, 14 or 15 maybe that were requested, and I think we wound up funding maybe about 9 of them.
It was 9. I don't remember how we did it, but we came up with funds to purchase a 10th.
I think the
Okay.
bids just came in.
Gotcha.
low.
Do you have a number of total vehicles in the department's fleet?
I could get that. It would include the, I don't think you want the Bearcat or the ERV or the motorcycles or that type of.
No, these are all
Just patrol
essentially
cars.
patrol vehicles,
Would you
right?
want the ones that include the CAT team and the traffic unit and the SROs and
I
all
don't
of
think so.
that?
And really, I think at this point it's more of a curiosity for me. So please don't put yourself out to any
I
great
think it's
additional effort.
27 or 28 in patrol.
Total.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay.
And that includes take-home cars.
So this
which
would be
people love.
this would be roughly half that then.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I thought I heard you say that we need 13 annually, so, and these aren't being paid for this year, so next year you very well could come up with 26.
Well, years ago, before the 2013 event, that was widely discussed, and the revenue issue in the city, we functioned very effectively with 9 each year, and that allowed us to keep no car over 3 years. There we're back to 27 for Councilman Hensley. That's right, 27, because we traded out 9 each year. No car was more than 3 years old, and no car had more than 80 or 90,000 miles on it. Everything imploded in 2013, and it took a few years to really hit us and impact us. It has struck, and that's why we're asking for such a high number, because if you don't fund 9 each year, it doesn't take long to get behind, and we're trying to recover from being significantly behind that rate of replacement. I mean, other than that, we wouldn't normally ask for 13 or 14 or 12. It worked, the system worked at 9 per year when we could maintain it.
Thank you for that note, and I was wondering what it was, because it seemed like we're on a roll there for a while, but do you, it looks like Councilman Graham has a question.
So when we take those 9 out of the fleet and they're sold, does that come back to the department to be used for purchase of vehicles the next year, or does it just go into general revenue? And then my second question is, I know that I believe Public Works have used, I think, some of the Explorers or the SUVs. I know those were sold. So does that money come back to the police department to reinvest into vehicles, or is it just in general revenue and that's it?
Well, it hasn't come back to us yet, but the sad aspect of that is if we make $4,000 a car, it's
Right.
only going to purchase 1 car. If we make $3,500, times whatever, you're going to be about $3,150, $31,500 for 9 of them. So, that'll buy 1 car. Now, that's 1 car.
Right. I know it's something like we did for the fire department. I know when they sold the vehicle, they were able to bring some of that money back in to repurpose for a newer vehicle too. So, Steve, you about to say something?
Just technically, though, all those funds that are non-enterprise come back into general fund, and then we make all the magic that you all do about budget related to general fund. So essentially, you're putting it in one pocket and take it out in the other. So if you were to have a hunk of money come back for those police cars, then you're really just reducing the general fund application of that, if that makes sense. So in the scheme of things, it really doesn't matter, at least from my point of view, other than for enterprise fund vehicles. And then, well, you're subsidizing that through fund balance in some cases for airport and transit, so. If I could, I'm sorry, but that story is still the same story that we started this budget off with this year and last year, and that is just some areas that are catching up, and, it just continues to compound, as well as facilities and personnel costs.
Councilman Schreiber.
Chief, on the vehicles, when they're assigned per shift, other than for the detective division, are they assigned specific cars to specific officers?
Yes, sir, they
How's that
are.
done?
It helps us with accountability.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a win-win. We know who's driving it, we know who's taking care of those cars, they know that we know, and it improves, I think, the longevity of the car. But yes, there are generally two officers assigned to cars, and they rotate them.
And do we still have a certain percentage of those cars that go out with the officers to their residents? And
Yes,
all
sir.
shifts, so they're visible?
Yes, sir, yes, and neighborhoods love it.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Let me see if I get this right from Public Works. Please, is that as these vehicles age, they're going to be put into general maintenance for service, and they're the ones responsible for maintaining your vehicles, right?
Yes, sir.
So it seems to me that if we're not funding currently any of these vehicles, and we expect them to last longer, right? Yet you reduced your budget on parts, it seems like.
So I reduced the growth of it.
Growth
We
of
had
it.
put a bigger number in, but it's still higher than last year.
Thanks for clarification. I know you said that, and I didn't capture it in my notes.
Just to one of his points, when some of the vehicles came in the last couple of years, we've tried to, we look at the whole fleet of general fund, and so it's also Sonny's group. Maybe we can use a police car that still has, our mechanics will tell us if the engine is running good enough for one of our groups to use it maybe. And so we try to then ship out like a 2005 Explorer, which they're telling me you can't really get the parts for now in some aspects. You got to go to aftermarket parts, and so it's becoming a problem. So if you look at these older Explorers out back, those are all roughly 2005 models.
Yeah.
And so that's why we do that. It may not be adequate for the police use, but maybe our inspector could drive that out to a job site. And if it happened to clunk out on him, we send the mechanics out and we get it ready and get it back.
Good. Thanks for the clarification.
And if I could just reiterate a point, there's the budget number, but obviously as we're going through the year, and department directors make adjustments to things that come up, and certainly vehicle parts would be one of those, particularly as you have a significantly aging fleet. So, throughout the year, they're making those kinds of adjustments as necessary.
Questions? I don't see any further questions. Chief, do you have any further pink sheet items or conclusion?
Well, I do if you want me to discuss them. Sean Stumpy doesn't like the attention, but I want to say that he and his staff do a great job. They really do. I just can't say enough for them at Central Maintenance. That's not the problem. They do a great job, so I thank them publicly. We had some personnel that we had requested, and that's probably, and a radio tower is what's left on our pink sheets.
Any questions?
What's this radio tower, Chief?
We are having serious difficulty communicating officer to station in the Ventura Avenue area off of Truman, across from Hy-Vee. Ventura goes down and kind of that dead end. And we had, the officer needs assistance call again a week or so ago, could not get out. Nobody knew where he was or what he needed. Very serious problem. It's just a void area. It's just not getting radio coverage, so we need to erect a tower so that we can bounce the transmissions off of the receiver and get it to where it needs to go. It's car to car, portable to station, portable car, all those problems there. We have the tower. It just needs to be erected, and that's why the expense is about $14,917 is because we have the tower, but we need to get it up and get the receiver on the tower.
How long has that been an issue for me? I don't know about anybody else, but that's a huge concern.
It is.
To where it shouldn't even have to be a pink sheet item. It should be.
I've been aware of it for within the last year. I don't know why we didn't know it before. If there's a change, has there been a change of anything that made that happen?
I don't know what really caused that change to occur. I know there's always been poor radio communication out there. It's gotten quite a bit worse. The two towers that were supposed to service that area, one is at the Water Tower on Fairgrounds Road in London Way, and the other one is at Fire Station 3. And just those two towers just falls right in the middle of those two towers, and they're just not able to penetrate down. It's kind of a valley, and they're just not able to penetrate down in there.
That's pretty serious.
It is. I don't.
That's serious.
There's no other way of putting it.
Councilman Ward. Lady.
Can those existing towers, can you add a booster to the receiver with that?
No, we can't. We've worked many different ways to try to figure out how to penetrate down in that area. And working with A&W, the company that provides us our radio communications, the only way is to put a new tower up there. And we've worked with Cole County Water District out there, and they're the ones that have graciously donated their land to allow us to put it up. And we just got to get the tower there, but everything's in place to have it installed.
Any further questions for Chief? I think that, do you have any other closing comments or anything with regard to your budget and requests and personnel and otherwise?
No, sir. Just apologize. We're not a well-oiled machine. Beth took vacation the last 10 days, so I have no idea what I'm saying. So anyway, thank you for your patience.
Councilman Graham.
I do have a question, Chief, and I think I asked this of Chief Schofield as well. I know he has Local 671, who, and I asked the question, how involved was Local 671 in putting their budget together and these pink sheet items? So my question to you is, with the FOP, how involved was the president of the FOP or FOP members involved in putting together the these pink sheet items or looking at the budget as a whole?
I think we have a pretty good communication system where the guys and gals do communicate every day as needed. There's kind of a freedom and acceptance. If you have a problem, let us know. If you have a feeling, let us know. Have a solution, you got to tell us. Got a problem, you got to tell us. That being said, my expectation has remained the same over the years, and that is I tell the captains to tell the lieutenants to tell the sergeants to find out what the sentiment is, what the needs are, and then, reverse that path and send it to through channels that we call lines of authority, so that we know what the list of wants, needs is, and then we, given the financial constraints, then we try to submit a reasonable budget. We don't just submit everything that is requested. I mean, some of it gets what I think maybe a little bit out of the mainstream. So, but I always expect them to ask. First of all, they should know without asking. We want the type of organization they know what the needs are, and so that if I say have this next week, it doesn't take a whole lot of work to submit requests. So that's my expectation.
Because when I just looked at it, I just see that there's 3 police officer trainees is really the only request for any type of additional officers or whatever. I just had a conversation on Sunday with two individuals who moved from Jeff City to Columbia, and they were talking about the crime that takes place in Columbia. But then someone made a statement that there's more crime in Jefferson City, I guess, based on per capita, than it is in Columbia. And I know that I just heard you talk about the different incidents. I know we just had someone to have a shootout with our police in Callaway County, and we've had a lot of incidents with people getting shot. We had one of our Lincoln students that our SGA president who was killed. And so I do see an increase, an uptick in violence in Jefferson City. And so do you have any numbers compared to last year in 2018 to where we at today, so that we can, as a council, can, and I'm not putting you on the spot for a night,